Blythe was free for the day because her family, the LaRoches, were boarding the Chernobog, France, in the evening. Mimi was also available since Natalie was coming on board in France as well. Around noon, a bulge blew announcing that the lunch was being served. The twins, Lee and Blythe, went off to the dining saloon, and both first and second class passengers could use, hoping it was too soon for anyone to realize that the twins didn't belong. "I'm meeting Victor for lunch," Mimi told us. "Something tells me you don't want company," I guessed. "If you don't mind," she said. I turned to Thad and asked if he was free for lunch, and he said he was. "No, I don't mind. Go see the love of your life," I teased Mimi. Truthfully, I was happy to be alone with Thad. "Where's Tesla?" I asked, as Thad led the way to one of the first-class serving restaurants. He wasn't sure. He speculated that Tesla might be in the cargo hold, guarding the prototypes. "Most of his inventions could fit in your pocket," he said, "but he brought something on board as big as a wardrobe." "What is it?" "He worked on it for a whole month while we were in England waiting for Astor to show up. There wasn't much for me to do since he wouldn't even let me in the same room with it. He said it was too dangerous. The thing was, I was catching up on travel before I could finally got into the rented lab." "Well, he'll show it to Colonel Astor?" I asked. "No, he's just bringing that one back to America." "Can't you tell me what his inventions are?" I pleaded, dying of curiosity. "You wouldn't write about it in one of your journalistic articles." "I swear," I said, meaning it. We were standing in front of the Ritz restaurant, glancing inside. I saw it was extremely fancy and stained glass windows, canned chairs, glistening dishware, and starched white-lined napkins folded in cone shapes. "Where can we go?" "I don't want to be overheard," Thad told me. A thrill ran through me. Thad was going to tell me Tesla's secret, which meant he trusted me. "I know where we can go," I said. Stepping inside the restaurant, I asked the man in the front podium if we could have our meals delivered outside the first-class deck. He assured me that that would be fine. Thad ordered the grilled mitten chops and mashed potatoes, and I requested chicken a la Maryland. We went outside and settled in the side-by-side deck chairs, where we could talk in private. We sat facing each other, our knees touching. "Tell me what you're going to present to Astor," I said in a whisper, as I led so far forward that my ears were almost to his lips. "All right, here it is," he agreed. "His first idea is to use his Tesla coil to create a magnifying transmitter which would beam up a frequency between New York and England over the seas. The transmitter would get the frequency vibrating, and it would create a natural luminescence. It would create an artificial effect like the Northern Lights. He's created lighted shipping lanes for the ships to follow," I realized. "Smart girl," Thad praised me. Not only smart, I thought mischievously. Ships would be able to see where they were going at night, like never before. The chance of them colliding would be greatly reduced, he continued. "How brilliant," I remarked. "That's one of the required to being big investment of equipment, even though he knows how to do it. His second idea, though, fits in your coat pocket. It's a small little machine that can shatter anything it's aimed at. Tesla told me if he sets it to the right vibratory frequency, it could split the world in half." I suddenly knew what it was. "The earthquake machine," I whispered exactly. "You're right. You saw it yourself." "What use does it have?" I asked. "Why would Colonel Astor be invested in it?" "It could change the face of the ocean travel, make it incredibly safer," he said. "The North Atlantic is a maze of icebergs. Ship captains have an awful time navigating through them, especially at night. Some of the icebergs are much wider under the ocean, and the navigators can't even know how massive until it's under them." "How would the earthquake machine help?" I asked. "It could shatter icebergs," he revealed. "By setting the machine to the proper frequency, measuring the approximate size and distance, the ship could shatter any iceberg in its path." That was so thrilling, to be here on the first-class deck with the greatest ocean liner in the world, and Thad entrusting me with secrets of immense importance. We were so close, both emotionally and physically, speaking in low tones. I couldn't imagine ever being apart from him again. Overheard the squawk of a seagull diverted my attention for the briefest moment. As I turned, my eyes flickered up to the bird. I caught sight of a nearby movement and a man ducking behind the door. It took no more than a second for me to realize why the man seemed familiar. The door was still ajar, and Thad was still talking. The trick was calibrating it correctly to the measure of the distance, times, and the velocity in which the ship was traveling, and then, too, cut him off by abruptly leaping into his lap and covering his mouth with a kiss. I couldn't allow Thad to continue speaking for a second longer. His lips were warm and tasted as salty ocean. At first he pulled back a little, startled. But the next second he pulled his hand flat on my back and drawn me closer while he returned the kiss. It would have been tempting to forget the man lurking at the door, but I knew we couldn't. Nuzzling Thad's neck to my nose, I whispered to him, "Don't look, but there's a man who threatened me and Tesla at the park was hiding behind the door." While we were talking, our backs had been turned away from the door. I'd caught sight of the man lurking there only when I turned to glance at the seagull. The moment I moved, he ducked behind the door. It was still open a crack. I guessed he was still there. Drawing out our lovely kiss, Thad eased me off his lap and suddenly sprung to the door, yanking it open. There was no one there, but there was a clatter of a man retreating quickly. In a flash, Thad was after him, chasing the man back into the ship. I followed Thad, nearly knocking down the waiter who was approaching with our lunches on a tray. "Sorry, we'll be right back," I told him as I dashed away. A few minutes, I could see Thad running full out, and then he turned a corner, and I kept running. It was no use. When I turned, he was not there. In the next moment, though, Thad returned, panting hard. I'd lost him, he told me breathlessly. "How much do you think he hurt?" I admitted that I didn't know. Thad wanted to go to his and Tesla's room. "A device is in there," he confided. "I think I locked the door, but I want to be sure." He took hold of my hand, and we hurried together towards cabin C-93, where he was staying with Tesla. The door was closed but unlocked. When we realized this, we exchanged worried looks. Cautiously, Thad pushed open, motioning for me to stay back. The cabin had been ransacked. Clothing and bedding were tossed all over. Drawers hung open. I hovered tentatively in the doorway as he crept stealthily into the disheveled room, lurching at drapery, dramatically throwing wide in the twin doors and wardrobe, flinging open the washroom. When he was satisfied that there was no one there, he waved me inside. "Lock the door," he said, and he knelt and took a metal case from under the dresser. I sat on the torn-apart twin beds and watched as Thad unlocked the case with a tiny key and lifted out an alarm clock-sized mechanism very similar to the one I'd seen Tesla use so long ago. "It's still here," he nodded, with obvious relief. "Thank heavens for that," I said. "Me and my big mouth," Thad rebuked himself. "Why did I have to go and blab all this stuff to you in such an open area? Wonder how much the guy heard." "You were speaking quietly," I said, which was true. "Good thing you stopped me. I like the way you did it, too." I could feel a warm embarrassment rushing into my face. It was the only thing I could think of, I guess. If our lunches had arrived sooner, I could have shoved a dinner roll in your mouth, but that wouldn't have worked as well. "I'm glad you didn't," he said with a smile, "but I'd like to check something, if you don't mind." "What?" Stepping closer, he wrapped me in his arms and bent to kiss me again. I melted towards him, returning his kiss, matching his intensity. This was our real first kiss. It was everything I'd imagined, and during the drawn-out cold months, I'd been longing for him. When we drew apart, he kept me close, looking into my eyes. "What are you checking for?" I asked softly. "I wanted to see if kissing you was really as wonderful as I thought it was out there on the deck, and even better." I pressed my forehead into his shoulder, and he held me close. The flood of happiness that we stood there in the ransacked room, momentarily forgetting everything and each other. "I should lock this up with the valuables in the ship's safe," he said after a few moments of bliss. I looked at him with a smile, and he smiled back. "You're right. We should do that right away." After we had done that, we went to the cargo hold to find Tesla. He was dressed in a long coat and cap. I'd seen him on the deck, scribbling bushy notes in his notebook. He was sitting on a wooden crate marked oranges beside a much larger rectangular crate. I assumed it was the secret device that had told me about. It was marked fragile. Use extreme caution in handling. Do not open under any circumstances. "Ah, Jane, that was you I saw on the deck. I was lost in thought, and I only realized I might have passed you much later." Tesla greeted me pleasantly. What a coincidence that you are aboard this vessel, though the controversial psychologist Carl Jung would prefer to think of it as scrutinosity, a converging of events in which seemingly random overlap in its actuality we do not yet comprehend, has an underlying meaning or purpose. Some day I would like to attempt an algebraic calculation of scrutinostic coincidence. At any rate, what brings you here? I explained to him the events that had brought me and my sisters onto the ship. It sounds silly, I know, I concluded. He rose and began to pace agitatedly. No, not silly at the least. A warning pricked up from the distant dimension is never to be taken lightly. I know of Mr. Stead and a great respected gentleman. You say icy figures into his premonition? He thinks he will die of ice, I confirmed. Tesla nodded thoughtfully. He might, if I do not act. Thad gave him a new, and the cabin was being ransacked and the thugs on the ship. I've locked the device in the ship's safe for now, he added. Well done. This confirms that there's no time can be lost. Tesla stated and resolved. I will make myself known to Colonel Astor tonight, after he boards at Chernobog. Perhaps he will predict a disaster to be alerted by the drastic actions taken in time. That's almost what Mr. Stead said, as though in different words, I remembered. Tesla wanted to discuss the plans with Thad, so I went to find my sisters. I saw Mimi on the deck talking to the same handsome, dark-haired man I'd seen with Mr. Gunningham and Natalie at the Waldorf restaurant. Based on the looks alone, I could see why she was in love. He was breathtakingly handsome, as I remembered him. Victor noticed me, hovering, and bade Mimi goodbye with a quick kiss. Mimi, I'm sorry we fought, I said. I just missed you so much, and I really want you to be happy. She hugged me. I'm sorry, too. How are things going? I asked her. Oh, I love him, Jane, she answered. He loves me, too, and I believe him. That's great, I cried. I haven't told him about my background, though. He won't care, Mimi. If he really loves you, he won't care. Are you sure he really loves you? She nodded uncertainly. He just asked me to marry him, she revealed. I gasped, my hands flying over my gaping mouth. What did you say? I will give him my answer tomorrow. What will your answer be? I don't know. I have a lot of thinking to do. In the evening, we came to the port of Chernobog, and the ships didn't actually dock, but rather a small boat carried passengers onto it. Blythe stood on deck with Mimi, Emma, and Amelie, and me. Looking at the LaRoche family, Mimi was fairly confident that she would recognize Miss LaRoche when she saw her again, and indeed she did, exactly pointing at the woman out to us. She was attractive with dark eyes and nearly black hair piled on top of her head. When she caught sight of Mimi, her face lit with a lovely smile. We hurried over, and they hugged like old friends. Mimi introduced Blythe first, and then the rest of us. Speaking English with a heavy French accent, Juliette LaRoche reached behind her full skirt and drew out a little girl who was so petite and precious she might have been a doll to come to life. She had the same olive skin and dark hair and eyes as her mother. She wore a lacy white frock with a matching bow. The lace on her little white socks matched the collar of her dress. This is Simone, Juliet said, and the girl smiled shyly. Louise, my youngest daughter, is with my husband, she explained. Then a handsome man with a mustache and a long dark coat joined her. He was the precious little girl in his arms, who was a slightly younger version of Simone. This is my husband, Joseph LaRoche, who Juliet said. I tried not to stare. Emma and Amelie remained composed also. Mimi and Blythe, though, could not even make the presence a calmness. They were flabbergasted expression gave them away. I see that you are surprised that my husband is a black man, Juliet said, taking it in stride. This is the problem. Is this a problem for you? Not at all, said Blythe, recovering from her surprised enough that Louise and Joseph LaRoche not one bit. Mimi, for once, was speechless. You could see that anything but a problem for her. This seemingly a happy couple was perhaps a view of her own future.